The night was heavy with silence, and the faint glow of the city poured through the curtains of my bedroom. I lay awake staring at the ceiling as if it would give me answers to the unease that gnawed at my chest. For months, something inside me had been screaming that my marriage was no longer the same. The warmth in his touch had turned cold. The words that once carried love had become careless and sharp. His name was Adam, the man I once believed was my forever. He was charming and strong when we first met. He painted dreams in the sky for me, and I chased them with blind devotion. For years I stood beside him, giving him my loyalty, my time, and my heart. But slowly his smile became a mask, and I could feel distance building like a wall between us. I tried to bury the feeling that he was hiding something. I convinced myself that stress from work was breaking him down. I told myself he just needed space, yet deep down I knew. A wife knows when she is no longer the center of her husband's world. A wife knows when another presence creeps into his life. The first sign came when his phone never left his hand. He would step out onto the balcony at night, whispering in tones I could not hear. He laughed differently, not the way he used to laugh with me. He guarded his messages like a soldier protecting treasure. I would ask gently who he was talking to, and he would wave me off, saying it was business. Business that strangely came alive only after midnight. One evening, when he returned home, the scent of perfume clung to his shirt. It was not mine. It was heavy, sweet, and foreign. My chest tightened as I pressed my nose against the fabric when he was in the shower. It smelled of desire and betrayal. I felt my knees weaken, but I swallowed the storm inside me. I needed proof. I needed the truth to stare me in the face, so I could no longer be deceived by hope. The truth came faster than I expected. A friend of mine spotted Adam at a nightclub on the other side of town. He was not alone. Beside him was a woman dressed in glitter and shadows. A woman whose life thrived in the loud music and flashing lights of the night. My friend described her as breathtaking and dangerous. The kind of woman men chase to forget their vows. When I heard those words, my heart cracked like glass under a hammer. My husband, the man who had once promised to protect my soul, was now holding another woman in a place where loyalty had no meaning. I wanted to scream, but the pain paralyzed me. That night, I waited for him to come home. Hours passed until finally the door creaked open. He stumbled inside smelling of alcohol and smoke. I watched him from the living room as his eyes avoided mine. He was guilty, and he knew I could feel it. But I said nothing. I sat in silence, letting the weight of betrayal sink into my bones. In that silence, I made a vow to myself. If he thought he could shatter me, if he thought I would crumble and beg, he was wrong. My heart was bleeding, but within that pain, a seed of vengeance was planted. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would rise from this humiliation and carve a path of revenge, so sharp that he would taste the bitterness of his choices for the rest of his life. And so began the story of Jessie, a woman broken, yet unyielding. A woman whose heart was betrayed in the shadows of a nightclub, but who would rise from ashes to make her husband regret the night he ever touched another woman. The following days felt like walking through fire while pretending not to burn. Adam moved around the house as if nothing was wrong. He kissed my cheek in the mornings and spoke casually about work and errands, as though he was still the same husband I once knew. But I saw it in his eyes. I saw the flicker of guilt hidden beneath a mask of indifference. Every time he left at night with the excuse of late meetings, I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my skin. The lies were piling up, and the distance between us became a canyon I could no longer cross. My heart wanted to collapse, but my mind whispered that collapse would mean defeat. I began to watch him carefully. I memorized the times he left and the times he returned. I noticed how his phone never left his pocket and how he carried a new confidence, the kind men wear when another woman feeds their ego. I did not confront him yet. I needed to understand the depth of his betrayal before I made my move. One evening while he showered, I unlocked his phone with the passcode I had once been freely given. My hands trembled as I scrolled through his messages. There she was. Her name was Aria, and her words dripped with seduction. She called him darling. She begged for him to return to her. She promised nights of passion he could never forget. My stomach churned as I read each word. Every sentence was another dagger twisting into my chest. I closed the phone and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. The man I had loved for years was now a stranger. He was giving his soul to a woman who thrived in the glow of a nightclub, a woman who knew nothing about sacrifice, marriage, or loyalty. That night when he left again, I followed him. I parked my car across the street from the neon lights of the club. Music thundered from inside, and people spilled out in laughter and smoke. Then I saw him. Adam stepped out of his car, wearing the shirt I had ironed for him that morning, and beside him she appeared. Aria, draped in sequins and confidence, her arms sliding effortlessly around his waist. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands ached. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced them back. This was not the time for weakness. I had to see it with my own eyes to bury the last shred of denial inside me. And I saw enough. He kissed her openly beneath the flashing lights of strangers, forgetting the vows he made under the quiet gaze of God and family. I drove away before they could see me. The tears finally escaped, soaking my face as I sped down the empty streets. My chest felt like it would split open from the weight of betrayal. Yet even in that storm of pain, a fire burned within me. I whispered to myself as the night swallowed my sobs. Jessie, you will not be destroyed. You will rise and make him regret the day he chose her over you. It was not just revenge I craved. It was justice. Justice for the years I gave him. Justice for the sacrifices I made. Justice for the love I poured into a man who chose glitter over gold. And I knew one day soon, Adam and Aria would both taste the sharp edge of my silent vengeance. The morning after my secret discovery, I looked into the mirror and hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were swollen from tears, my cheeks pale from sleepless nights, and my spirit felt fractured. But beneath that broken reflection, I saw something new forming. It was strength. Strength born from betrayal, carved out of pain like a blade sharpened by fire. Adam returned home just before dawn, smelling of perfume and smoke. He climbed into bed beside me, without a word, without shame, without even realizing I was awake and watching him. For a moment, I felt the urge to scream, to shake him, to demand answers. But I swallowed that urge. Confrontation now would give him power. It would show him that his betrayal had crushed me. I could not allow that. Instead, I began to move silently, preparing my heart and my plans. During the day while he was away, I walked the city in thought. I studied the places he went, the people he surrounded himself with. I asked quiet questions, pretending to be nothing more than a wife, curious about her husband's routine. What I learned painted the picture of a man, already lost in shadows. He spent nights drinking, wasting money, and chasing illusions with Aria by his side. One evening, I visited the same nightclub where I had seen him before. I entered not as his broken wife, but as Jessie, the woman who would no longer be silenced. The music was deafening, and the lights painted the walls in red and gold. My heart raced as I pushed through the crowd searching for him. And then I saw them. Adam leaned against the bar, with Aria pressed against his side. She was laughing, her hand resting boldly on his chest, as if she owned him. My stomach tightened, but my face remained cold. I stood there unseen for a long moment, memorizing the image of my husband betraying me, in front of strangers. I turned and left without a word. I did not want a scene, not yet. I wanted something deeper, something that would make both of them feel the weight of what they had done. Outside the club, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. The sound of music faded, and in its place, I heard my own heartbeat steady and strong. That night as I walked home, I began to shape the outline of my revenge. It would not be loud or violent. It would be precise. Like a blade sliding through silk. Adam thought I was weak, a woman who would cry herself into silence. Aria thought she had won, that she had stolen my husband and destroyed my place. Neither of them knew who Jessie truly was. I began with small steps. I gathered every financial detail, every hidden account, every weakness Adam had left exposed. I studied Aria from the shadows, watching her habits, the people she trusted, the way she craved attention. I did not rush. Revenge is not fed by impatience. It is fed by patience, by letting the fire burn slow until the time comes to unleash it. As I lay in bed that night beside Adam, who slept carelessly after another night of betrayal, I whispered silently to myself, Jessie, you will rise. Jessie, you will conquer. Jessie, you will make them pay. Days stretched into weeks, and my silence became my greatest weapon. Adam continued to live in his fantasy, believing his secrets were safe, believing his wife remained blind. He returned home late, offered excuses that grew thinner with every word, and yet I smiled faintly as if I believed him. My calmness unsettled him at times, but he shook it off quickly, sinking deeper into his affair with Aria. I began to build my independence quietly. I reached out to old contacts from my university days, reigniting friendships I had neglected while dedicating my life to Adam. Many of them were successful now, working in law, business, and finance. I listened to their advice, I took notes, and I slowly started to prepare the foundation of a life where I would no longer depend on him. At night, I documented everything. Every receipt I found in his pockets, every message I glimpsed on his phone, every strange transaction I discovered in our bank statements. Evidence piled up in my hands like stones, and I was shaping them into a fortress of truth that would protect me when the time to strike arrived. The hardest part was pretending to still be the loving wife who cared about his meals and his comfort, pretending to not notice the glitter on his collar or the lipstick stain on his glass, pretending that my heart had not been shattered into pieces. But I wore the mask well, and Adam did not see the storm forming right beside him. One evening, he told me he would be working late. I nodded, offering him a gentle smile. After he left, I followed once again, careful and silent. His car led me to a different part of the city this time, to a place more hidden and expensive. When he entered the building, I waited, then stepped inside under a different name. It was not just a nightclub. It was a private lounge, a place where secrets drowned in music and alcohol. And there she was again, Aria, dressed in black silk, with a smile that could cut like a blade. Adam held her hand as if she was his treasure, as if I had never existed. They danced under dim lights, bodies pressed close, lips almost touching. I watched without trembling this time. My tears had dried, replaced by steel. What once felt like unbearable pain now turned into fuel. Every laugh she gave him, every tender touch, was another match thrown into the fire of my resolve. I left the lounge before they noticed me. On the way home, I walked slowly, the cool night air wrapping around me like an armor. I no longer felt fragile. I felt alive with purpose. Adam had made his choice, and so had I. By the time he returned in the early hours, drunk and careless, I was waiting in bed, pretending to be asleep. He slipped in beside me without guilt, without shame, but he had no idea that the woman lying next to him was no longer his wife. She was his reckoning. The morning sun spilled into the room as Adam snored carelessly beside me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans that grew sharper by the hour. The Jessie who once begged for love was gone. What remained was a woman determined to rise from betrayal and reclaim her power. I began distancing myself emotionally while keeping the mask of a dutiful wife. I no longer waited for him at dinner, no longer asked where he had been, no longer showed jealousy when he walked out the door dressed for nights of deceit. My silence unsettled him more than tears ever could. He expected anger, he expected confrontation, but instead he found indifference, and that gnawed at his pride. During the day, I poured myself into building the foundation of my escape. I secured a private bank account, transferred small amounts of money that he would not notice, and began updating my resume. With every step, I felt lighter, as if the chains he had placed around me were beginning to crack. I also began to study Aria more closely. She was not just a woman from the nightclub. She was clever, manipulative, and ambitious. She lured Adam not only with beauty, but with promises of power and thrill. She knew how to make a man feel like a king, while secretly controlling the board on which he played. But like all who chase glitter, she had weaknesses. Her vanity, her greed, and her hunger for attention would one day be her downfall. One afternoon, as Adam claimed he was at work, I visited the lounge where Aria often spent her evenings. I dressed elegantly, nothing extravagant, just enough to blend into the wealthy crowd. I observed her from across the room. Men surrounded her, eager for her laughter, desperate for her touch, and yet her eyes always searched for Adam, as if he was the key to something bigger. I realized then that she did not love him. She wanted what he could give, the comfort of money, the illusion of stability. To her, he was not a husband, not a man bound by vows. He was a resource, and I would use that greed against her. When I returned home that evening, Adam was already there, pretending to be exhausted from work. He looked at me, as if expecting me to question him, but I simply smiled faintly and walked past him. The silence pressed heavy between us. I could feel his unease growing, though he tried to cover it with arrogance. That night as I lay in bed, I planned the next phase of my vengeance. It would not come in anger, but in precision. I would strip away the illusions he had, built with Aria. I would expose their lies, not with shouting, but with undeniable truth. And when the time was right, both of them would watch as the life they built on betrayal collapsed into ashes. For now, patience was my greatest ally. I would wait, I would gather, and I would strike when neither of them expected it. The days moved forward and my mask became unshakable. To the outside world, we looked like a married couple, still bound by routine. But inside the walls of our home, I was a ghost, moving silently beside him. Adam noticed the shift, though he could not name it. He grew restless when I no longer questioned his late nights, when I no longer called to ask if he was safe, when I no longer touched his arm with tenderness. He mistook my silence for weakness, never realizing it was the calm before the storm. I continued to collect evidence. Bank statements showed extravagant charges at places he had no reason to be. His credit cards carried bills from hotels far away from his office. I copied every document, stored every receipt, built a case so strong that denial would become impossible. My hands shook with both rage and triumph each time I uncovered another piece of his betrayal. At the same time, I studied Aria more carefully. I followed her discreetly, blending into the background as she moved from club to club, feeding off admiration like a predator, feeding on prey. I learned where she lived, who her friends were, and what debts she owed. She was reckless with money, drowning in expenses she could not afford without men like Adam funding her illusions. I knew then that her downfall would come not only from me, but from the weight of her own greed. One night Adam staggered home late, perfume heavy on his clothes, lipstick smeared faintly on his neck. He collapsed onto the bed beside me, not even attempting to hide the evidence anymore. My body stiffened, but my face remained calm. I did not shed a tear. I did not ask a question. I simply turned my back to him and closed my eyes, even though sleep was impossible. Lying there, I realized something had changed inside me. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled me. What ruled me now was determination. I was no longer the betrayed wife clinging to broken love. I was the storm gathering at the edge of his horizon, silent and unseen, but inevitable. The next morning, while Adam showered, I looked at him through the reflection in the mirror. He hummed carelessly, unaware of the war brewing in my mind. I whispered silently to myself that soon his world would crumble, not in chaos, but in precision. His lies would be exposed, his pride dismantled, and the woman he betrayed would rise stronger than he ever imagined. With every passing day, my plan sharpened. Revenge was no longer just a desire. It was a destiny waiting to unfold. The time for silent observation was ending. I had gathered enough evidence to expose every lie Adam had woven. I was ready to take the first steps into the storm I had prepared. My heart no longer trembled at the thought of his betrayal. Instead, it beat steadily with purpose. I began by meeting with a lawyer, recommended by one of my old friends. I carried with me a folder thick with documents, photographs, receipts, and bank statements. The lawyer examined everything carefully and looked at me with a mix of pity and admiration. He told me my case was strong, that I could walk away, not only free from Adam, but with security that would allow me to rebuild my life without fear. Hearing those words felt like a flame igniting in my chest. For the first time in months, I felt hope stronger than despair. I left the office with a new sense of power. Adam thought he controlled the board, but I was already rewriting the game. Each step I took was no longer for him but for myself. I was no longer a woman begging for love. I was a woman preparing to take back her freedom. At home, I played my role carefully. I cooked. I smiled faintly. I spoke with just enough warmth to keep him from suspecting. Inside, I was cold as stone, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He boasted about work, about meetings, about the lies he thought I still believed. I listened, nodding, my mind elsewhere. But revenge was not only about him. It was about her too. Aria had danced through my marriage as if it were a stage for her entertainment. She believed she had won, that she had taken my husband and destroyed my place. I could not let her leave untouched. I began digging into her debt, her unpaid loans, the men she had discarded, once they no longer served her. Piece by piece, I collected the fragments of her life, until a picture emerged of a woman standing on fragile ground. One push, and she would fall. The push would come soon. But first, Adam needed to face me, not in anger, not in shouting, but in a truth so undeniable, it would slice through his arrogance. That night as I lay beside him, I whispered silently into the darkness, "Jessie, your time has come. The waiting is over. The reckoning begins now." The morning of reckoning arrived quietly. Adam sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee, scrolling through his phone with the careless arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. I placed a folder on the table before him, thick with the weight of his secrets. His brow furrowed as he looked up at me, confused, then curious, then uneasy. I did not raise my voice. I simply told him to open it. He flipped through the pages and photographs, each one pulling the mask from his face, piece by piece. Receipts from hotels, charges from clubs, images of him with Aria under flashing neon lights, and transcripts of his messages promising her the world. His hands began to tremble as the color drained from his skin. For the first time in months, I saw fear in his eyes. He tried to speak, to deny, to twist the truth, but I silenced him with a calm stare. I told him I was done being his fool, that his lies had finally met their grave. He stuttered, tried to claim it was meaningless, that she was just a distraction. The words fell flat in the heavy air between us. I told him I had already met with a lawyer. I told him the evidence was more than enough for me to walk away with dignity while his name would be dragged through mud. He slammed the folder shut and begged for patience, but I could see in his eyes that his pride was crumbling. He was no longer the man in control. I was. He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. For years I had given him every piece of me. Now I owed him nothing. I left the kitchen without another word, leaving him to sit in the ruins of his exposed lies. That night he did not go out. He paced the living room, restless and broken, calling Arya again and again. I overheard enough to know she had grown distant the moment she sensed weakness. She wanted a man who could fund her illusions, not a man about to lose everything. His voice cracked as he pleaded with her, but the more he called, the less she answered. I lay in bed, listening to his downfall, unraveling in whispers and silence. For the first time in a long while, I smiled in the dark. My revenge was not finished, but it had begun. Adam was tasting the bitterness of betrayal, the same bitterness he had forced upon me. This was only the beginning. Arya would feel it too. After Adam's mask shattered, I turned my eyes toward Arya. She had slipped into my marriage like a thief and poisoned what once was sacred. She thrived on glitter and attention, feeding on men who mistook her charm for love. I refused to let her escape untouched. Through quiet connections, I learned more about her debts, the loans she had taken from dangerous people, the men she had promised to pay back but abandoned. I discovered her reputation in the underworld of the nightlife scene, where whispers of her name carried both desire and warning. Arya was a woman who burned through everything she touched, and she was moments away from setting herself on fire. I made a few calls, careful and precise. I exposed details of her unpaid debts to the people she owed. I revealed how she used Adam's money to cover her indulgences. The dominoes began to fall quickly. The men who once surrounded her with admiration now turned away, realizing she was nothing but a trap of destruction. The clubs that once welcomed her began to shut their doors, unwilling to be tied to her chaos. Meanwhile, Adam grew desperate. He tried to reach her night after night, but she no longer answered. When she finally did, it was only to tell him she was finished with him. She had no use for a man drowning in shame and legal threats. She discarded him the same way she had discarded countless others. I watched from the shadows as both of them unraveled. Adam sat in the living room, with his head in his hands, broken, humiliated, stripped of the pride that once blinded him. Arya vanished from the circles she once ruled, her debts chasing her through the city like hounds on the scent of blood. I felt no guilt. My pain had forged this path, and I walked it without hesitation. They had taken my love, my loyalty, my years, and crushed them underfoot. Now they were the ones crushed beneath the weight of their own choices. Yet even as I savored their downfall, I knew my journey was not only about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself. Jessie the wife had died the moment Adam kissed another woman beneath neon lights. Jessie the survivor was the one who stood now, stronger than the betrayal that tried to destroy her. And soon, I would close this chapter for good. The day of final reckoning arrived not with noise, but with silence that carried the weight of storms. Jessie walked through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, where her divorce would be finalized. Her lawyer carried the papers, but it was Jessie who carried the dignity. Across the room sat Marcus, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. The once confident man who strutted into clubs, now shifted uncomfortably in a wrinkled suit that no longer fit his frame. His eyes darted to her, but Jessie did not return his gaze. The judge read the terms, and every word fell like a nail sealing a coffin. Jessie was granted the house Marcus once mocked her for decorating. She received the savings account she had carefully built while Marcus wasted his on champagne and shallow nights. The business shares she had invested in remained hers alone. When the gavel struck the desk, it was not just the sound of legal formality, but the closing of a chapter. Afterward, Marcus approached her in the corridor, his voice trembling. He said he made mistakes, and he still loved her. He begged for forgiveness. Jessie stood tall, her shoulders straight, her eyes clear. She said forgiveness was possible, but reconciliation was not. She had outgrown the cage he tried to keep her in. She walked past him without bitterness, leaving him with the echo of her footsteps as the last thing he would ever hear from her. Life blossomed in unexpected colors after that. Jessie turned her pain into fuel for creativity, opening a small art gallery that showcased not only her work, but the work of women who had been broken and rebuilt, themselves stronger. The opening night was filled with light music and laughter. Friends old and new surrounded her, and among them, she saw eyes that admired her, not for the way she sacrificed, but for the way she conquered. Months later, Jessie stood in front of a large painting she had created. It was abstract swirls of fire and water, colliding and transforming into something radiant. To the crowd, she explained that it represented survival, turning betrayal into beauty. The applause that followed was not just for the painting, but for her journey. She felt the warmth of freedom on her skin, like sunlight after endless rain. Marcus drifted into obscurity, his nights at clubs, ending with debts and faces that vanished when his wallet emptied. Jessie never checked on him again, for her story no longer needed him. She no longer needed revenge, because her life itself became the sweetest form of it. And so Jessie lived not as the woman abandoned, but as the woman who rose. Her scars were no longer marks of shame, but medals of battles fought and won. She had been broken, but she built herself anew, brighter, stronger, unstoppable. Her story was no longer about betrayal, but about triumph. Jessie had finally reclaimed her life, and with it, the freedom to write her own ending.